So during the setting up of the kīngitanga, each tribal area had a mountain that was significant to them. For Waikato, the mountain was Karioi. So it was called one of the pos of the kīngitanga. So a po is a post. It is active. It is not passive. And mountains, of course, are very active. If you look at one of the whakatauki about maunga, he rārangi maunga, tūtonu, he rārangi tangata, ngaro noa. So mountains are forever, people are not. Which I compare that kind of thinking, the tikanga around mountains, to the current thinking and the idea that karioi is passive, hence the wahine moe or the sleeping lady idea. That is a very new concept, and it is really contrary to Māori thinking, and contrary to the history of this area. And the same thing with, for example, Waireanga. When there was, they changed the name to Bridalveil Falls in 1933 to make it more appealing to the tourism industry. We've been successful through the National Geographic Board to return it to Waireanga. So those names and holding on to them are really important in restoring them, and I think that's a great thing about the work that Oliver has done, and it is really looking at reinstating those old names back onto the landscape. So, but I think people need to really think about why it is they're naming certain areas or boats, names that really have no real relevance to the subject at hand.
Kia ora, Oliver. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Oliver McLeod. I'm a geologist based in Hamilton. Originally from Auckland, I've been living in the Waikato since 2016. My family goes back to about the 60s in the Hamilton area.
Cool. And your connection to this place began, when did it begin?
Well, the first time I saw karioi was as a boy, so I would have been under 10 years old, maybe 8 or 9. And they would have just been swimming in Rangoon. But really the true introduction began around 2016. It was Professor Roger Briggs at the University of Waikato who kind of took me under his wing and introduced me to karioi as the maunga, rather than visiting the coast for the beaches. My attention kind of switched to this maunga.
Cool. And your geological research led you to connect with local hapū.
So the story of how all of that began is I was trained in classical geology through University of Otago, with very little exposure to Te Ao Māori. But when I came to the Waikato to do my PhD, I was studying Mount Pirongia, the sister maunga to Karioi, and about a year into that project, it started to dawn on me that in addition to the geological history of that landscape was a cultural history. And it was Professor Tom Roy at the university who, again, took me under his wing and kind of, through those first stumbling attempts, introduced me to the cultural landscape that is Pirongia. So when it came to investigate karioi some years later, I sort of intuitively knew that I needed to approach mana whenua first to see if there was interest in me carrying out a similar study on karioi. So the first port of call was Angeline, Greensill and Raglan, and I turned up at her house. We had a cup of tea and we discussed a potential research project around karioi. That then led to an invitation to present along with a few other researchers at the Te Kopua Centre. And that involved a round of questioning with kaumātua in attendance there. And that was essentially where the first layer of permission came to begin geological research on the maunga. That was followed really by a day of induction where I visited important cultural landscape features like Manu Bay, Whale Bay, and the coastline around Naranui Beach with members of the Greensill whānau. And then it was following that I made contact with Taruke on the Toreparu side of karioi and began the same process of gaining an understanding of what were the parameters of a culturally appropriate investigation from a geological perspective. And something that I think is important to note is geologists don't have a great reputation for engaging in any kind of cultural understanding of landscapes. It's not common in New Zealand, and so I kind of started from the beginning and had to learn how to do that with the guidance of people like Tom Roa, who really provided those initial points of contact as I came over to the West Coast to study. And then sort of in parallel to touching base with mana whenua around karioi, there was also contacts with Ngāti Te Wihi more on the Aotearoa side and Kāwhia, and that was through Diane Bradshaw at GNS, who kind of really took me under her wing. Again, that's the only analogy I could provide here. Took me under her wing and introduced me to the right people, put me in a good standing so that what I was doing could be understood and the motives behind it. And because of those initial steps, which were done in good faith, I was able to better understand the tikanga and the parameters of this study that I was about to do, which involves taking rock samples, it involves walking across culturally sensitive landscapes. It also involves an aspect of collecting new knowledge as well as interpreting old knowledge about these places, which would then be published in a public setting. So there were some stakes to this research, and I had to navigate that very carefully. I think the most important outcome of going through that process, which took many months to gain the appropriate permissions, was a kind of social license to do the work, and also that I was able to follow certain tikanga within my own research methodology, which I wouldn't have known about previously.
How was it for you, Taruke? Like this approach with this project with Oliver?
We were in the process of restoration, reconnection, knowledge of our hapū, our history, our landscape. We were in a similar kind of process really that he was, but he obviously came from a very scientific background, and we rose from the earth that we're on, and so, and it's all about knowledge. and the value of it, whatever you're doing. If you seek to increase knowledge that brings benefits, that brings a greater good, then all knowledge is good. And so it's something that I wasn't familiar with, geology, and so with Oliver's appearance, it gave us an opportunity to understand our landscape in a different way. We understood our landscape in terms of history, in terms of whakapapa, place names, significant sites, and all of the tikanga that goes with that. But he brought another layer that we weren't familiar with. And so that was exciting.
And it was refreshing that he wished to connect with you and learn from the cultural aspects of the landscape.
I don't think he could carry out a study that was complete without the input from hapū, who lived around the mountain. I mean, I think science for a long time has sat outside the knowledge of hapū and iwi, and has acted like it can be totally objective, in that it can read a landscape, just like archaeologists. They can read a landscape without knowing anything about whakapapa or names, or a multitude of different kinds of knowledges that you might call mātauranga Māori. But for me, I don't think one can really present a full picture without taking all of those things into account.
Mm. What were some of the major learnings for you from this new approach, Oliver?
Well, if I go back to Pirongia firstly, it was what kind of dawned on me is that there's encyclopedic knowledge about these Māori, but you have to search for it. I'm meaning from the Mātauranga Māori side. It's not necessarily accessible to non-Māori unless you really go out of your way to build those relationships and attend the right wānanga, basically, and meet the right kaumātua. And the key concept, I think, which bridges something like geology, which is a scientific discipline that comes from abroad, with, say, a hapū's understanding of maunga, people and place, would be whakapapa. That's actually the central concept that would apply. So in my case, it was, how do I relate my types of study, which are apparently coming from a foreign place, to Aotearoa? How do I integrate that in some way with the existing Indigenous knowledge of these landscapes? And whakapapa is the key connector. That is the deep genealogical web connecting people and landscapes and to the cosmos as well. Geology actually does this in its own way also. So by studying karioi, by studying the stratigraphy of karioi, we're gaining an understanding of deep time. And that approach resonates in wānanga, because we are essentially discussing different aspects and different scales of whakapapa. And I found that that's been the beautiful connector which I've been able to draw on to bridge the gap in understanding between these different knowledge disciplines.
And when you married the two, what discoveries did you happen upon? Like the depth of knowledge is one of the things that you shared with us earlier about, having a tōhunga and a scientist sitting at the same table.
So the challenge as a scientist, when it comes to what we're talking about, reflecting on whakapapa from multiple different disciplines, knowledge disciplines, is that Mātauranga Māori tends to be codified in a different way. So through pūrākau, through motiatia, through waiata, through different forms of kōrero, and the knowledge is constructed and stored in a different way. So if I think about the pūrākau relating to karioi and pirongia and kārewa, within that pūrākau is some really fascinating clues that relate to the geological history as well. So when we talk about the children of karioi and kārewa scattered between them, perhaps it shouldn't be a surprise then that when the oceans between karioi and kārewa were surveyed, there are in fact dozens of buried small volcanoes which are the children, some of which form reefs. And so it's a humbling experience for me in a way, and this happened also with the study of pirongia, that many of the observations that we as scientists think are novel now have already been observed countless times over multiple centuries.
Yes.
And maybe this is a word of wisdom to New Zealand science community, is have wānanga and talk with the kaumātua, because these landscapes are already explored and there's already a lot known.
Yes.
But you will have to work to understand how the knowledge is codified, and the additional complexity is that there are two languages at play. So there's also translation. Yeah. And people and place names are crucial. Place names are one of the most important repositories of Mātauranga that remains in the landscapes. Nearly every stream has a name and a story. Within that's codified knowledge about the past uses of those streams, even information about the rocks that are present in those places, and about the people and the mythological entities, hatuparehi, who are present in those landscapes. All of that is codified knowledge. And the karioi map, part of that is I realised it was essential that I made an attempt to understand through talking with the right kaumātua, so that I could have the best chance of painting an accurate portrait of karioi from a geological point of view.
Just following up on what Oliver has spoken about, the reclamation of names, I agree it's really important. If you look at the LINS maps now, there's a lot of the old names are missing, or maybe they're those map makers, and that's another area, scientific area, have left out because they don't know, they're not searching in the right places, they don't know the history of the area, so many of the names are left out, and some of them, the ones that have been included, really important ones like Manuaitu and Rahinui, are both spelt incorrectly. And so it's left up to us to change those names, return them back to the original state, because they have a meaning, and at the moment they're meaningless because they're incorrectly spelt. That's just a couple of things. Every hill, every valley, every river, almost every tree as well, large ones were all named. All the trees that were used for bird snaring, things like that, where you put your eel pots, your fishing sites, all named, right around the coast. So it requires a lot of study on the part of those coming from a scientific position to learn as much as they can, because it adds a richness to their study, to their field of study. And it's really important because not only does it add to their study, it adds to everybody's study. It adds to everybody's knowledge, which is great. Just looking at Karioi and you know, from the, if you were on the north side, on the whāngaroa side, looking south, it looks very different to sitting on this side, on the southern side, looking north, as it does if you are driving down, say, Mangatawhiti Road, and you look across, it looks very different. And then if you're on the western side, at, say, Patuatini, the reef, and along there, it looks quite different again. So we have the peak on our side, the taumata of Karioi. We have two of those ridges, the daughters of Kārewa. And I mean, if we look at naming again, and I look at Te Toto Gorge and the name of that, and how if people don't get the names right, then their a history is created, is constructed. So Te Toto, one of the meanings is red, it can mean blood, it can mean a type of rock, a type of scoria. And that is the real meaning of Te Toto. But there's this common idea around, it's current and it's contemporary, that it's a place where enormous bloodshed was spilt, that Te Rauparaha had come and had caught some people up there and he killed them all, pushed them off the cliffs, whatever. And so it's a terrible place. I mean, it couldn't be further from the truth. These are Te Rauparaha's close relations. Ngāti Koata, Tahinga, Koata, Mote, Ngāti Kārewa, all of these coastal people, closely related to Ngāti Toa. There is no reason, and people also travelled by waka with a sail on them. They didn't paddle from place to place, especially in the open sea. You often put your sail up to get quickly from one place to another. And so there was no need for Te Rauparaha to come by foot and push people off a cliff. They often travelled to whāngaroa via waka. So we need to dispel those. It kind of arise from this idea that we were so bloodthirsty, we were, you know, attacking everybody in sight. And I think that story arises from those myths about and no appreciation of the deep relationships between coastal hapū, who are known as tainui.
Wonderful.
Can I just have I had a question, if you could talk about Tamahine or Kārewa. On the topo map, that's a single peak, but I've heard you many times over the years refer to it as actually a series of peaks. Could you talk about this?
Plural. Because when the old people referred to ngā tamahine, not their tamahine, they referred to it as plural.
So it's a reference for a collection of peaks, of which there are many visible.
On this side.
On this side, and is it going up
side,
a single ridge?
It's going up a single ridge.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think a lot of people wouldn't recognise, wouldn't understand. Yes, that there's actually, it's multiple peaks on a ridge.
It's multiple peaks on a ridge, and every place is named. And that's where part of the, you know, the great thing about the work that you're doing is bringing it to the attention of people, and the names and people using those names correctly, and just finding out, like, either learning about it for the first time, because we in this time of great change, we all need to be, I could use the word, armed with knowledge. Armed with knowledge. And we can't just accept simple stories that make everything sound good, like The Sleeping Lady or Bride of Vale Falls.
If we keep on this same topic, one of the things that I encountered early on, if we compare Kariwa to Pirongia, every single peak on Pirongia has a name.
That's right.
Almost every peak. On Kariwa, there are far fewer names recorded, either on the topo map or that I've encountered in Kōrero. And I was wondering if that stood out to me as atypical, almost as if the names have been lost. Do you think that some of these names have been lost because of the complex cultural history out here, or is it simply that there were fewer names designated because it's a smaller moment?
No, I think every peak would have been named. I think there are a lot more names than we think, and you're possibly right that they may well have been lost in time, because when the mountain was first surveyed, it was not to scale. They kind of just determined that it was 12,000 acres, possibly that it looked like 12,000 acres, and there were very few names put on those maps, which is very unfortunate because usually they were accompanied by local hapū who set out the names in the survey books. But I don't think Karioi was adequately, certainly wasn't surveyed, and they say it at the time, because that's another source of knowledge as well. The little surveyor books, that's what they're called, survey books.
Survey books, yeah.
Yeah, and they record a lot of the names. But I think you're right with Karioi. We need to do a lot more. There needs to be more research done, and that may well come from the survey books, and it also may come from land court minutes. It's a combination.
So, from your perspective, Oliver, what are some unique features of our rohe and Karioi? It's a tough one, isn't it?
So the Karioi landscape, from a geological perspective, I believe this is a globally important site for understanding basaltic volcanism. So in New Zealand, we have different types of volcanism that have occurred in the central North Island, rhyolites and andesite calderas and stratovolcanoes. In the Auckland area, we would have basaltic small cones. Karioi is one of the only places in the world where the products of subduction volcanism and intraplate volcanism have erupted in the same place at approximately the same time. So there's only two other volcanoes on Earth that I know of where that's actually happened. One of those is Turrialba in Costa Rica, and the other is Mount St. Helens in the Cascade Arc in the United States. So Karioi was formed as a series of 5 separate cones which erupted one after the other to form the main Karioi maunga. This has then been eroded. This process of volcanism began during the Ice Age, 2.6 million years ago, and finished about 2.4 million years ago. Some key geological curiosities within this Karioi area would be beneath Wairinga, beneath the lava flow which forms the falls of Wairinga, there are intact chunks of beech tree preserved with bark still attached. And these pieces of tree trunk are older than Karioi itself, but if you saw it washed up on the beach, you'd think it was a pine tree that fell down maybe 10 years ago. Another fascinating feature is we have the oldest lake in New Zealand, which Pakihi, which was formed as a result of a lava flow damming a limestone cave system. This produces a feature called a pulhea lake, which means that it essentially is a valley which will fill with rain after storm events, and that water will sit there in a lake-like environment for a couple of weeks before eventually draining out through the karst system to the Aotea Harbour. So that is, by our best approximation, the oldest lake in New Zealand, formed 2.33 million years ago. To put that in perspective, the next oldest lakes in New Zealand are less than 100,000 years old. So this is, if this is correct, this is a remarkable feature of this landscape. Along the Karioi coast, there is a remarkable diversity of geological phenomena. We have explosive ash rings, we have stacks of lava flows such as at Te Tora Gorge. We have the Papanui Point basalt, which forms the remarkable headland at the north end of Ruapuke Beach. We have ash rings on the south end of Naranui Beach, and many different scoria cones dotted around the mountain. Some of those eruptions even flowed south of Karioi into the Toripari wetland and altered the hydrology of that wetland as it was developing. Another really curious feature of the geology here actually occurs in Raglan itself, at Kirikiripu Hill, which you drive past on the road into town. That lava flow is really strange because if you look up close in the quarry face, it is filled with these giant green blocks of crystalline material of a rock called lherzolite, which actually represents the mantle beneath the Karioi area. So this is famous throughout the New Zealand geoscience community as the most mantle-rich lava flow observed anywhere in the Zealandia continent. Up to 30% of the lava flow by volume consists of these chunks of the Earth's mantle, bright green crystalline material, which were explosively ripped up. That type of eruption we would call a diatreme eruption, and in other parts of the world, diatreme eruptions have been responsible for exhuming diamonds to the surface. So it was a highly explosive, violent eruption which occurred right in Raglan and which produced the bedrock which underlies nearly all of the town today.
When you were doing your book launch, you used the statement that Karioi was in a chronic state of erosion. Those words hit me like a hammer. So what do we need to do for future generations and to look after her, reinstate her?
Right.
So I'll approach this the best I can from a few different angles. The first thing I'd say is that Karioi is a motif of the South Pacific, not just Aotearoa. It's a motif of the South Pacific because it's a basaltic, forested volcano, deeply weathered, deeply dissected. It resembles Rarotonga, it resembles the islands in Tahiti, the Marquesas, Vanuatu, and so on. Karioi is a motif, a repeating symbol that in some ways transcends time. So Karioi began erupting during an ice age 2.6 million years ago. At the time it began erupting, sea levels were much lower than they are today. The coast was up to 20 kilometres offshore. Karioi actually was not a coastal volcano. And if we think about the Pūrākau, Karioi at one point lived inland with the sister Pirongia. That's exactly what you would have seen if you were there 2.6 million years ago, is Karioi and Pirongia living in the interior of the North Island. So my main message with regards to erosion, when we're talking about coastal erosion, Te Tora Gorge for instance, this is a natural and ongoing process which has been occurring. The present coastline has been shaped in the last 100,000 years during a handful of sea level high stands. And when I look at the coast, I can see two processes competing. You have the sea cutting coastal cliffs, which are present right around anywhere north of Whale Bay, essentially. And then we have the undercutting is causing these rotational collapses. So Te Toto Gorge being the most famous example, but also the lagoon at Whale Bay, also Manu Bay Reserve, that's another collapse, and there are smaller collapses near Naranui Beach. So the sea is slowly chiseling away to form these very, very steep cliffs, and then when it undercuts, it then has rotational landslides which take out large chunks of the maunga. We then have rain which cuts valleys through the central axis of those collapsed scarps, reforms the valleys down to sea level. The sea then begins cutting again. An important detail is that now that we're faced with climate change, sea level rising currently, we're going to see that process potentially speeding up. That means cliff formation intensifying and potentially more of these failure scarps. And this will be an ever-present process as long as the sea is adjacent to Kariwai Maunga, which it will be for many, many thousands of years into the future.
Wow.
Is there any other angles you wanted in terms of... Did you just mean purely, or do you mean sort of erosion of the whenua related to land use? Because that's another aspect to touch on.
Yes. Yeah, touch on that.
So the other aspect of erosion, which is much more connected to people than the ocean-bound erosion, would be related to land use within the flanks of Kariwai Maunga and the surrounding hill country. So steep hill country will tend to erode faster when it's in pasture without tree roots bounding the soil. And that's something that I hope future generations continue to pay close attention to, is preserving the special soils which exist around the flanks of Kariwai, which are farmed, the lowlands, the Toriparu peat soils, and all of the elephanic soils which occur around the Whangaroa Aotea region. These soils have formed through the accumulation of tephras or ash layers from the central North Island over the last 2 million years. So 2 million years taking to form the soils, and we must do everything that we can to maintain those soil profiles so that they can continue to provide for us in coming generations.
So replanting and, reclamation of the rata, Taruke. But, yeah.
Yeah, replanting the slopes.
Not to
It's
mention
difficult.
sand dunes as well.
And
It's a
sand
whole different game out there, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sand dune.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's looking forward, it's really a community, hapū collaboration, whereby if we're all, as I say, armed with knowledge about our environment, people and place and people, then we will understand the value of replanting everywhere. We need to do that. And the more people know, the more, I think, inclined they will be to get out there and be responsible for what has been taken from those places in the past. There's always that tension between farming and restoration. But I think many farmers now are coming to the point where they see that there's such a benefit to be had in resting off some of the areas for planting. If you look at the benefits of the biodiversity, the bird life that comes back when you're planting all those trees that once stood around that mountain, Puriri, Kairaka, Meadow, Kaikatia, all of those. I mean, Ruapoku used to be hugely forested, and that's not so long ago, 150 years ago. So much has changed. But I think most people now are, you know, they recognise that we all need to do something. It takes all of us to do it. Not just pockets of people, but everybody.